Welcome to Cattle Connect, your insight into Alabama's beef cattle industry. I'm your host, Kayla Greer, and this is Cattle Connect, brought to you by the Alabama Cattlemen's Association. Welcome back to the Cattle Connect podcast. I am live on site at the Alabama Cattlemen's Association 82nd Annual Convention and Trade Show as I'm recording this podcast, and it's Saturday morning. We have had just an awesome lineup of events, from educational sessions to our record-breaking pack auction that we had last night, where we raised over $51,000 for the Alabama beef pack. We've had a lot of networking opportunities. So much fun has been had. And I can't harp enough on the quality of the educational sessions that we've had as part of this year's event. And so I really wanted to just take a minute and pull some of our speakers aside so that we can have a conversation with them. And one of those speakers is joining me here right now. Her name is Kacy Atkinson, and she joined us to speak on our estate planning panel that we held during General Session 1 on Friday afternoon at Bama Beef Meat. Kacy, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And you probably are happy to be here for multiple reasons. One, because you're in the Southeast and it's a tick warmer here than where you came from, right?
It is. I do apologize that I think I brought my Wyoming weather with me to some degree, but it is still warmer here.
Yeah, it's a little bitter right now here in the state of Alabama. So I'm sorry that it couldn't be a little warmer for you so you could thaw out while you were in town. But nevertheless, Kacy, I always like to start our podcast by letting our viewer or listeners get to know who you are. So just give us your spiel. Who are you?
So I am currently a cattle rancher. I was born and raised on a very isolated, harsh, hostile, very remote cattle ranch in southeast Wyoming.
Okay.
It's probably one of the only ones left in existence in the entire lower 48 that kind of fits those boundaries. A gallon of milk for me is 85 miles away.
Oh my gosh.
And that's also where I went to high school. You know, we've never had telephones, not even landlines. We get our mail twice a week.
Oh my gosh.
We are often snowed in the wintertime, and your only mode of transportation is a snowmobile. Our nearest neighbor is like 16 miles away that, you know, isn't related to us by blood. And so it's a very isolated, unique place to grow up.
That is unique. I'm going to stop complaining about my morning commute to my daughter's school now.
Right.
That your gallon of milk is 85 miles away.
Yes. So my great-grandfather homesteaded there in the late 1800s, and, you know, we have been there ever since. We're still there today. But that being said, I was not the one who was intended to come home to the family ranching operation, and so I have done a lot of things, and I have lived a lot of places. I actually went to college in Texas.
Okay.
And lived there for 12 years, spent 8 years working in higher education.
Okay.
Taught everybody's favorite class, public speaking and basic communication, for several years while I was down there.
Yeah.
I was an extension agent in Colorado for a number of years, and so that was kind of where professionally I developed a passion for estate planning. I also worked with the Leadership Development and Education program in Wyoming briefly. There was also an estate planning component to that, and so I've had this experience outside the ranch and some things that I did and had planned to do before I ended up coming back home 8 years ago, and I've been a full-time cattle rancher for the past 8 years.
Very cool. Well, you mentioned just now a couple of your ties to estate planning, but you haven't mentioned your most important one, and kind of how you became an advocate for having a farm succession plan. Tell us that story and why that's a platform that you hail from now.
Absolutely. So, you know, from a very young age, even though I was the older sibling, it was, you know, kind of the plan that CD, my younger brother, was always going to be the one who came back and took over the family ranching operation.
Because you're fourth generation, right?
Because, yeah, on the same land. Technically, my great-great-grandfather was also involved in agriculture, but he had a separate enterprise from my great-grandfather. Okay. So it's, I don't know what you call me, fifth, fourth, but we've been in agriculture for a long time. And so, you know, CD was the one who was going to eventually come home and take over the family ranch. He had also left after high school and gone and done different things with his life. He had spent some time, you know, fighting fires, and he had an extensive horseshoeing business. He was a licensed journeyman electrician. He was very handy. And so in 2016, he made the decision, he was 31 at the time, that it was time for him to come home and take over. Dad was 72 at the time. And so, you know, he was slowing down, and it's a fair-sized ranch we have in Wyoming,
Yeah.
and for one person to have taken care of it all of those years definitely had taken a toll on my
Right.
father. And so CD recognized that if he was coming home, it was probably time for him to do that. And so he had made that decision in the spring of 2016 and decided he was coming home and had done so. He had been home for a few weeks, and he had gone back to town to take care of some horseshoeing clients and pick up some feed for the cattle, and was coming home. And on May the 4th, 2016, he got within about 6 miles of the original family ranch where my great-grandfather had homesteaded, and his heart stopped beating.
Oh my gosh.
And we'll never know why his heart stopped beating, but in the span of one failed heartbeat, everyone's life and future changed in that moment. And so I had just been promoted to county director in the county I was in extension, and so I ended up staying in my job for another year to try to get everybody settled. And we had undergone a lot of change at the time I transitioned into county director, and I wanted to not leave anyone in a lurch, and so I stayed for another year. But after that point, I decided I needed to go home and at least, get my parents settled.
Right.
See what I could do to be helpful, see if that was a future that I, could envision for myself. And so that's what I have been doing for the past 8 years is, continuing on a lot of legacy and a lot of history and family tradition there.
Yeah, and so just to kind of put into perspective, you're a single lady.
I am single, yes.
And you're, I guess, like the manager of y'all's family's operation now, right?
When I came home, probably much more so the hired hand, right? Because I had been gone for a long time. I had been gone for not quite 20 years, but close to 20 years at that point in time. And I think it's easy for parents to forget all of the things that they taught you growing up. And, we have a lot of skills. I think that just because we maybe haven't used them in some time doesn't mean we don't possess them.
Right.
And so it took a while, I think, of just going out and doing and showing proving yourself, right?
Yeah.
That I did, in fact, know how to do all of these things. I was very observant growing up, or whether I had done them as a child and they had just forgotten. And so it took some time. Probably you were very much stuck in that kind of hired hand category.
Yeah.
But now I think, I hope that my dad views us much more as equals, and that we make most of our decisions together. We talk through everything, and I have been able to, because I've written for Working Ranch magazine for 10 years. I've had a lot of opportunities to stay engaged in the industry. I was part of the first Trailblazers class. Advocacy has been a passion of mine for a long time. And so I've had opportunities to go to all of these conventions and trade shows and talk to people about the latest research and the latest technology, and where are we now on animal health and what do we need to be concerned about, or where are we on genetics and what do we need to be thinking of. And so to be able to bring some of that education back with me and to tweak some of the things that we are doing on the ranch to make improvements. It has taken me a little bit to earn the trust to be able to do that.
Boy, do I understand that.
But I think
that.
we're there. I think we're there.
Well, good. So this ranch that you and your dad manage and make decisions on together, tell me about the size of it. I know it's far away from civilization, but how big are we talking?
Yeah, so I very much want your listeners to, keep in perspective that it takes me 40 acres to run a cow.
That's right.
Which
very
is
different here.
Very different than Alabama.
That's right.
So we do manage about 16,000 acres and a 400 head operation.
Wow.
And, and like I said, my dad did that all by himself for countless years.
And you're right, that would take a toll on a person. And so now you two kind of manage that together, and it keeps busy. I know y'all have the harsh winters. And what are summers like?
Summers are glorious. If you've ever wanted to visit Wyoming, let me recommend July.
Okay, that is good to know.
It is the least likely month to snow. I won't tell you that it won't snow in July because I would be lying to you. But July is beautiful. So our house sits at about 7,500 feet in the air. It is a very high elevation, hence the hostility of where we live. Operation. And so we don't see a lot of days, really even in the high 80s.
Wow.
Most of our summer hovers somewhere around 80 degrees.
Wow.
And so for me, I would love to live in the South. If anyone would like to adopt me and my cows, just let me know. I would love to relocate somewhere
I'm sure
warmer.
Your lungs are loving the abundance of oxygen right now too.
It's really easy for me to breathe down here. But you know, I've always obviously loved the South. I did live in Texas for 12 years, but summers are just, I mean, it is beautiful. I've traveled the world. I've set foot on 6 of the 7 continents.
Oh, wow.
Currently, I don't need to go to Antarctica because I live there. But you know, of all of the places that I've seen, my home in the summertime is probably the most beautiful place I've ever seen.
I can only imagine.
If only summer lasted more than about a month, it'd be fabulous.
Yeah, and here we are down here being like, oh, come on, winter, please. Gosh, we need some reprieve.
I know, you need to invite me back next time in July, and I'll bring my cold front with me in July, and people will be more appreciative.
I can think of a couple of dates that we could use your cold front. But anyway, so my point in saying all that was that you manage this ranch and you work with your dad and you have this story that brought you back to the ranch and you have all this experience. And so getting back to our topic here of estate planning, why do you think that estate planning is such a hard topic to approach for families? And then to follow that, why do you think it's so important?
Okay. There's a lot of reasons why it's a difficult conversation, right? First, you have to be capable of facing your own mortality and your own death because, right, you are literally planning for what is going to happen when I die.
Right.
And we as human beings have kind of a natural aversion to talking about that,
we're
right?
invincible, right?
It's hard to envision or to think about, you know, we're not going to be there anymore, especially when we think about something that we have poured so much blood, sweat, tears, and love into. Like, we don't ever want to think about the day that is not going to be ours. And then you have to couple that with the reality that these conversations are probably going to be painful for your children, right? Not only from the fact that you're not going to be here anymore, but oftentimes, especially in today's world, you're going to have to tell a child that they're not getting something.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm a firm believer that fair is not equal.
Right.
Where we see so many people get into trouble and, you know, ranches fall apart or farms fall apart is when people try to be fair and equal. And so they carve apart an operation to make sure that off-farm heirs still get what they consider their fair share.
Oh man, that's good there.
And that leaves an inability for the one who stayed and who stuck around and who wanted the life to not be able to make it work. And so I'm a firm believer that fair is not equal. I grew up in a family where I probably started being told at like 6 years old that my future was not on the ranch, right? So, so I can say, I don't know if the chicken or the egg came first. I don't know if it's because I got told that I had no future there that I decided then I didn't want a future there, because it is insanely isolated. It's not like I can go to dinner with a friend on a Wednesday night, like a normal person might be able to. And so, or if, you know, I just naturally wouldn't have wanted to be there because my skills and my abilities and my personality would have wanted to leave anyway. But I think my parents did do me a favor in setting me up very early on to know CD was the one who was going to take over the ranch. And so I needed to envision a different life for myself. And so, you know, but when you don't do that, when you have kids who think they're going to get a part of something, or, you know, you don't know which one you're going to leave it to, or you have kids that can't get along. We see that a lot of times in families. It just creates a lot of tension. And I understand that people don't want to be the bad guy, right? You don't want to have to tell someone you love, sorry, this isn't going to play out the way that you think it's going to. And so I think those dynamics of the difficulties of the conversation is often what people use as the excuse just not to even deal with it. But I can tell you, in my opinion, anyway, I think it's a disaster, right? So the worst thing that can happen is for someone to be surprised in the reading of the will. Because when the person who made the decision is no longer there to have the conversation with, to explain why they made a decision, right? We have to take, because we're human beings and we don't always do the right thing and react the right way, right? We tend to take our animosity and our anger out on whoever's left. And so I have seen so many relationships destroyed after the fact because they didn't have anyone left to blame but each other.
Yeah.
Because they weren't able to have that conversation and gain that understanding from the person who made the decision.
Right.
I've also seen situations where no decision was made. An indecision is a decision, right? If you can't make a decision, that is still very much a decision that has consequences, and usually not good ones.
Right.
And so, then you are in the middle of this grieving process.
High emotions anyway.
And then depending on the complexity, it's one thing to grieve someone that was 90 years old and you knew the end was coming. It's another thing to grieve someone who died tragically or unexpectedly. Or in some sort of horrible way. Grief has all sorts of different facets to it and how it processes and how you go through it. And so when you leave people then to have to make these literal life-changing decisions in the midst of their worst moment in time, that rarely ends well.
Right.
Right?
Not only because it's hard emotionally, but nobody is capable of making their best decision in that moment anyway.
Absolutely not.
And so, wow, what a good perspective. And I know that you kind of maybe got it the hard way, and I'm sorry for that. But that is such good advice, that equal is not always fair, or fair is not always equal.
Fair is not always equal.
And that an indecision is a decision. I've never heard it put that way, but wow, that's that gave me chills when you said that. Because I think of so many situations, and I think as landowners and as farmers and as ranchers, it's one thing for somebody who lives in a house in a neighborhood to have their will put together and their estate put together. But when there's land and assets and all of these other things involved, it's a much bigger animal that people can't appreciate until you're in the middle of it. And so I appreciate those little nuggets of advice. I'm going to carry those with me personally.
Good.
Want to hear more about upcoming beef cattle events? No problem. Visit us online at bamabeef.org/events or check out your latest issue of the Alabama Cattleman magazine.
So what are some of the first steps? If you're a young person and you're looking at your parents and know that they're in that indecision phase, or maybe we've started the paperwork and haven't signed it and sent it off yet, or wherever it's not been done. You, the child, how would you start that conversation?
That's a tough place to be. So I always tell people, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And this is kind of, I have a very long story, and hopefully maybe someday we'll have the chance to share it somewhere where your listeners can hear all of it. But, we had an estate plan. Unfortunately, the estate plan wasn't put together the way that it should have been.
Okay.
And my brother and I weren't involved in the making of that estate plan.
Okay.
Right? And so for someone who worked with estate planning professionally, let me say, and could have brought even just some professional advice to the table, I've struggled for years because I feel like I could have helped my parents avoid some of the hiccups. And so the first thing I say is, you don't know what you don't know. Right? None of us don't know what we don't know.
That's right.
And so knowledge to me is power. And so when you are kind of starting that process, even as a family, I think the more conversations you can have with people who have gone through the process, the more you kind of, become comfortable with the idea of putting together an estate plan. You kind of start to hear how other people have handled tricky and delicate situations. You see that they got through it. That they were able to make it work. I have probably talked to no less than a couple hundred families now who have done estate planning. Good. And none of them have done it exactly the same.
Yeah, right.
None of them have approached it exactly the same. And so it has been fascinating to me to hear all of the different ways that people have approached. Okay, how do we handle fair is not equal? And what does that look like? How do we handle spouses or stepchildren or skipping generations or going to nieces and nephews instead of children or grandchildren? Or how do we handle divorce? How do we handle death, right? there's no one size fits all in this.
Right.
But as you start hearing other people just, I think, talk about that, like, right, if you have a natural resistance and reluctance to even think about it, when you start hearing other people talk about it and why it matters and why it's important, I think it starts percolating in our own brains, right?
Yep.
And so it's maybe kind of a roundabout way to get the conversation started, but if you can get your parents listening to other people and hearing those things and hearing how they got through it and hearing how they got it set up, then they will naturally start, I think, thinking through some of those things, like, well, how would we do this?
Yeah.
You know, how would we handle this? And then I think as a family, one of the most important conversations you can have to start is to sit everybody down and not talk about how we're going to do it, but what's the goal?
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Is the goal to see grandchildren running this operation? Is the goal for you all to go out and get your own lives and we're going to sell it at the end of the day? Like, what's the goal here? Like, what do we collectively as a family hope is going to happen?
Yeah.
Because you can't get to a destination if you don't know where you're going, right?
Without that destination.
And I think if you can keep everyone centered on the goal, like we've all agreed we want to see our grandchildren running this operation one day. And if you can get everyone in agreement and bought into that notion, then suddenly some of those conversations, I think, become less contentious.
Yeah.
Because you've got everyone focused on the end result.
Goal-oriented, yeah.
As opposed to today's result or what I'm going to get out of it. Because then people naturally start thinking, well, grandchildren aren't going to be here if I'm demanding my cut, or, you know, these things aren't going to happen if I'm not willing to contribute and sacrifice and those kinds of things. So I think those things are important. There's so many fabulous resources available for free online. Most extension programs have available to you online some estate planning tools or workshops or things that you can pull in and kind of read through and go through and at least get a familiarity with what this process might look like, what I'm going to need to put together. And then I highly encourage, like, once you're to the point where you are ready to even start taking some formalized steps, is to start asking people which lawyers they use.
Yeah.
Talk to your trade associations, your cattlemen's associations, your crop associations, your farm bureau, whatever you have available to you.
Yeah.
And say, okay, who do you know that went through this process? Because we're, for the most part, pretty open books. I think if we've gone through the process, we're pretty willing to share.
Yeah.
And talk to people about, you know, which lawyer did they use. You have to have a lawyer at the end of the day that's licensed in the state that you're going to file in. But that being said, we have lawyers that are licensed in multiple states. We have lawyers that have built relationships with, you know, there may be a fabulous estate planning lawyer in Indiana that you could meet with via Zoom and still get the benefit of all of their wisdom and all of the things that they need you to think through, and then use the lawyer in Alabama to file the legal documents that are necessary. And sometimes lawyers will even work together because they recognize that maybe you're in an area that doesn't have a lawyer with large expertise, but they're willing to do the work if someone else who really does have a I have a lawyer that I use myself, and she has built relationships with lawyers in 22 other states.
Oh, wow.
That she has worked with people in 22 other states to get their plan, and then the home lawyer files the paperwork at the end of the day. So don't feel like you're limited to just who's in your hometown.
Yeah, you're not boxed in.
For a lawyer, because the right lawyer really does make or break you.
Yeah. So you've mentioned, obviously, the family has to be at the table. You need a lawyer to file the paperwork. Who are some other players in the game?
So I think somebody who can definitely be a benefit to you is somebody who really has a lot of financial understanding of agriculture, whether that's a CPA or a financial advisor, especially because, you know, there's some, if you're maybe thinking retirement, most people in agriculture don't think retirement.
What is retirement?
I know. But sometimes retirement might be necessary to transition the operation. And so having that financial planning piece put into place can definitely be beneficial. I mean, but at the end of the day, it really can be the family and the lawyer. Those are the two most critical parts.
Those are the two pieces you have to have
for an estate plan.
Okay.
Yes. for sure.
All right, everyone. Well, we are wrapping up on time. I wish that I could keep talking to Kacy because she's just such a wealth of knowledge, and she has some experience that could just go a really long way. She's one of those people that she mentioned that you could talk to learn from her experience, and she's just got so much good to offer in this realm. That's such a difficult conversation to have, but unfortunately we are beginning to wrap up on time. Like I mentioned earlier, Kacy was a panelist on our General Session 1, and she was joined by an agricultural lawyer whose name was John DeSaggio. He's with Webster Henry. And Megan Spain was also on that panel. She's a certified financial planner. Dr. Kelly Russell with Alabama Extension, she's an ag economist with Alabama Extension. She spoke as well and offered some of the educational resources and some of that ag economic perspective on estate planning. And then Ken Kelly also with Ag Extension, or with Alabama Extension. He moderated the panel and is just a wealth of knowledge in so many different arenas. So the panel was really good. If you missed it, I am sorry. We will try to do something where we can get all of these minds together and record what was said or capture that information in some means. But in the meantime, I hope that what Kacy said here today maybe gets your wheels turning, maybe gives you some ideas. Maybe you'll call up your neighbor that has been through this and you like what you saw in terms of their transition, and maybe you now feel empowered to give them a call and say, hey, I'd love to hear about your experience. Kacy, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for coming to convention and Bama Beef Meat.
It was fabulous. I was so excited to get to.
While you were there, what else did you get done? Didn't you serve as a judge for the Junior Cattlemen?
I did. I judged some public speaking contests in the
okay.
morning.
Well, you're a professional, so that's
was
perfect.
Fun. So yeah, I had the opportunity to do that, and your trade show is fabulous.
Thank you.
So kudos to whoever puts that together. I was very impressed. So I've had the opportunity to talk with some of your trade show participants, and of course sat in on your pack auction last night, and so I'm excited to see what else today holds.
Yep, there's plenty on the agenda that we should probably get back to. But in the meantime, guys, I hope that Kacy has encouraged you to maybe start considering this conversation, and maybe she's encouraged you to come to next year, the 83rd Annual ACA Convention and Trade Show, to capture all the awesome educational content that we offer at that event each year. So I am going to let you go. Don't forget to come back more next week for Cattle Connect podcast. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Cattle Connect, brought to you by the Alabama Cattlemen's Association. Be sure to subscribe to get notified when our next episode goes live. And until next time, remember, beef, it's what's for dinner.